I published a new blog post earlier today, February 17th, 2026, discussing some of my trades over the past few days. A link to my blog post can be found in my profile page here at YouTube. I'm continuing a small allocation shift that reduces my stock allocation, which is almost entirely invested in dividend-paying stocks, and increasing my purchases in alternative yield assets, including the 38 Treasury bills bought at auction that are discussed in today's blog, another nibble at an exchange-traded first mortgage bond, and 5 Tennessee municipal bonds that were bought at significant discount to par value. I am waiting for better yield opportunities in corporate bonds, which may not occur for some time. I discussed in my post a recent Federal Reserve of New York study that found that U.S. companies and consumers paid 90% of the increase in the Republican tariff taxes imposed by Trump during his second term. That is consistent with other studies that I have reviewed. Trump, his Secretary of Treasury, and Stephen Moran still maintain that foreign companies pay the tariffs. The Republican tariff taxes are paid by U.S. importers, of course. At least Trump has not claimed recently that foreign countries pay the massive Republican tariff taxes that are levied on U.S. importers and collected by the U.S. Customs Bureau, as he has done many times in the past. Instead, the argument now seems to be limited to foreign companies reducing their prices to the U.S. importer sufficiently to match the tariff taxes and consequently absorb the U.S. tariffs. Moran may be the only economist in the world who actually believes that nonsense. Part of his theory is that the tariffs will cause the U.S. dollar to gain in value, which would, in his uh, uh, reality creation, offset some of the tariff tax. The U.S. dollar has lost about 10% of its value against a basket of foreign currencies during Trump's second term, but this does not cause a mea culpa on his part. Why do they maintain this fiction about foreign companies absorbing the entire Republican tariff taxes? It's simple. The Trump and his acolytes will never admit that the Republican tariff taxes are massive tax increases paid by U.S. companies and consumers. They will never admit that, no matter how much data support that conclusion, that the U.S. companies, importers, and U.S. consumers pay the Republican tariff taxes. Bassett claims that the tariffs are not inflationary, but he stated in early 2024, before he became Treasury Secretary, that tariffs were inflationary. This is his statement that he made in February 2024, and I quote, "Tariffs are inflationary and would strengthen the dollar. Hardly a good starting point for U.S. industrial renaissance," end quote. The Wall Street Journal found the document where he made that assertion, but then that was before he became Trump's Treasury Secretary. The amount of inflation caused by the Republican tariff taxes will depend on how much of the taxes are eaten by U.S. companies and how much will be passed on to U.S. consumers. This pass-through in the Republican tariff taxes has been occurring, but has been restrained so far for three primary reasons. The first is that the U.S. importers loaded up on far more foreign products than they needed in advance of Trump taxing them. But that inventory is probably exhausted by now, or very close to it, except for maybe a limited number of U.S. companies. The second is that major companies will only gradually increase consumer prices to recoup the Republican tariff taxes paid by them, trying to avoid a price shock that actually results in lower volumes and lower profits. The third reason is that the importers may receive refunds if the Supreme Court finds that Trump had no authority under the IEEPA statute to levy the tariffs. If refunds are ordered by the Supreme Court, there will be one big mess, of course, but then there would be no need to increase prices to recoup what the importers had paid since the tariff taxes were levied against their products that they imported. There are other tariffs, particularly sector tariffs, such as the substantial tariffs that Trump imposed on steel and aluminum imports and many other products that are not currently before the Supreme Court. On the other hand, if the Supreme Court finds that Trump had the authority to levy the Republican tariff taxes on U.S. importers by executive order, then the pass-through of those taxes to U.S. consumers will accelerate. The annual price increases for food at home was 2.9% through January 2026. The annual increase for food away from home was up 4%, and energy services, which is electricity and gas service, rose 7.2% annually through January 2026. That data is from the last CPI report from the BLS. The non-seasonally adjusted annual price change for beef and veal was reported at 15% in that CPI report, and coffee was up 18.3%, both due to the Republican tariff taxes. The primary cause for those spikes in beef and coffee and veal prices are the massive Trump tariff taxes imposed on Brazilian exports, because Trump did not like that country pursuing criminal charges against his buddy, the former president who attempted a coup. In Trump world, coups against democratically elected presidents are just patriotic duties of the loser's supporters. Those numbers are in the last CPI report, which I discussed in today's blog. It is important to keep in mind that the annual numbers still include several months prior to the new Republican tariff taxes being levied on U.S. importers. CPI is now being lowered by commodity prices like gasoline declining significantly. Commodity prices were down 7.2%, but those costs are highly volatile, and they may have started to trend up, and they certainly would go much further up in the event there is some kind of conflict with Iran or some disruption of shipments, crude oil shipments from the Middle East. A fictional expense category, and nobody pays this expense, is called owner's equivalent rent, which is weighted at 26.04% in CPI. The annual increase was at 4.8% in owner's equivalent rent through December 2024, shortly before Trump started his second term, and was last reported at 3.3% for the 12 months ending in January 2026. As I said, no homeowner actually pays rent to themselves, and this kind of fictional expense cannot be changed and it has not been changed by any of the policies pursued by Trump in his first year or so of his second term. The increase in my home's value since I built it in 1982 is not an expense to me. I don't pay rent to myself and never have paid rent to myself. But the increase in value increases my unrealized gain. So it's not an expense item. It's a unrealized profit item, which is now about 10 times or so the total cost that I have in this home, including subsequent repairs and replacements.